All right, welcome everyone to the very first episode of the Lee Schools TV podcast. I'm Adam Wright with Lee Schools TV. Very excited to bring you this new series, and our very first guest for our podcast series is the new Safety and Security Director for Lee County School District, Rick Parfitt. Rick, thank you so much for agreeing to be our first guest, kind of our guinea pig in this podcast series. Thank you for being here. So obviously you're the Safety and Security Director for the school district, so that'll be the main topic of discussion for this podcast is safety and security. Before we get started, I want to kind of go over your credentials a little bit, your background, so people kind of have an idea, context, and your experience. So you joined the school district in April of this year, and you came to us from Florida Southwestern State College, where you were the head of public safety and campus police, right? For about 11 years?
Yes.
Okay, and you have a background in police work. You are originally from Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And you got started at a really young age, right?
I did.
Tell us a little bit about that. What made you want to get into police work?
Well, I grew up in a police family, so I'm sure that had an influence, even though I had brothers that didn't go into it. But I grew up in a police family. So I lived that and experienced that. That was exciting to me. And I had the opportunity because of connections of my dad that I took a job when I was 19 years old, and it was at a ski resort community in Pennsylvania. And my dad knew the chief of police there, and I started out as a part-time police officer while I was in college. And I just worked usually 1 or 2 days, usually the weekends. And of course during ski season that was the busiest time, but I got my first experience of policing at a young age.
And now you have over 40 years experience, I think.
Yes. Yes.
So I mean, based on what I know about you and our experiences talking with each other so far, I think the school district made a really good choice in hiring you. So happy to have you here and really happy that you're our first guest. You're also the president of the Florida chapter of the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, correct?
Yes.
What does that involve?
It's a national organization. It's headquartered in Sacramento, and it was founded probably about 28 years ago. And it came about because the murder of an actress named Rebecca Schaefer in Los Angeles, and the investigators on that case and the supervising investigator on that case were so concerned with their investigation, found that this young woman had been a victim of stalking for a long time, and the stalker, in fact, is the one that paid a private detective, hunted her down, and eventually murdered her in her Los Angeles apartment. And these folks got together with some other individuals in Los Angeles, district attorney and some others, and created this threat assessment, and it's grown quite a bit since that time, and it's evolved into a national organization. It's has 14 chapters now. As a matter of fact, Florida is the latest one, and we've been in existence for about 2 years, a little over 2 years. And the nice thing about it is that it recruits and has a number of people involved in what we call targeted violence or investigating targeted violence. And so it's not just law enforcement, that's a big part of it, but we have a lot of mental health, corporate security, researchers, and it's evolved into an organization that's evidence-based. There's science behind what's involved here, and actually several years ago they started a certified threat manager certification, and it took them several years to build this program. And so right now there are only about maybe 150 of us in the country that are certified as what they call CTM, certified threat managers. So it's a pretty prestigious accomplishment for folks that are involved in that business, and we we started the Florida chapter, like I said, about 2.5 years or so ago, and we've grown. We've doubled our size. We started out with 30 members, and we're up to probably about 60 now.
And who are the members involved? Who?
The membership takes over a wide variety of folks. We have people in higher education. We have individuals in corporate security and hospital security. We have a lot of folks in the defense contractors, Lockheed Martin. We have Disney, SeaWorld security, a number of those folks. We're recruiting and have folks in the travel industry, law enforcement, and law enforcement's been a big part of our chapter here in Florida. And we actually have what we call a winter conference here in the last 2 years. It's been in Orlando. And we get, like I said, some of the best people in the country that are presenting and part of ATAP.
So obviously your resume is very impressive, and we're glad to have you at the school district. Now you're in charge of the safety and security of nearly 100,000 students here in Lee County. Pretty tall task. If you could explain to the people listening, what exactly is your responsibility as Director of Safety and Security?
Well, it's obviously the oversight of the overall safety and security of the school district and the students. But I think it's more than that, because it's an approach that we have to look at, that it's not, I can't protect 100,000 students and staff and things like that. So it takes the community. So everybody has a role in protecting themselves and each other, in school and on our properties and on our campuses. And I think that's the message from a safety and security director that we need. That's a big role of mine, is making sure these folks are trained, understand their roles, identifying dangerous, concerning behaviors, things like that.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it was one of the topics I wanted to talk about. I know we'll get into new technologies that we have at schools and what things we are planning on getting, but I know a big part of it is the human element, right?
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit, why that's so important.
Certainly.
And how it's different from other avenues of safety and security.
Certainly. And safety and security has evolved quite a bit, and technology along with it. And there's nothing wrong with technology, but we have to be cautious of gadgets and quick fixes on what's going to protect us, because at the end of the day, it's not going to be a gadget. It's not going to be a locked door. It's not going to be any type of hardware. What's going to protect us is situational awareness, our awareness of our surroundings, looking out for one another, and the communications piece of it. So if somebody's concerned about the behavior of a friend or a student, they have to know that they can tell someone that we can take that information. It's not an adversarial situation. It's not that we're intending to lock kids up, lock people up for problems they may have, but to intervene. The intervention is the piece, and that's the human piece that I think that is so missing. And I think we've kind of conditioned ourselves, and we've conditioned our kids out of that we look at it's somebody else's job. And I don't know how many times over the years I've heard people say, well, you're with safety and security or campus police, that's your job to keep us all safe. Well, it is, but it's also all of our jobs to do that. Mm-hmm. And if we, like I said, I think we've conditioned ourselves away from that. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, with all the distractions today that are young, especially young people are dealing with, but even others, I find myself walking down the halls here, on my phone trying to text, and I'm not as agile as some of the kids, so I typically have to stop. But I mean, even safety for walking out into traffic, walking into a pole. those types of things. So that's taken away from that situational awareness that I think people need to be. We don't need to be paranoid, but we have to be aware of what's going on around us.
You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and rely too much on technology or other people to do the job of looking out for each other. You ever bumped into anybody looking at your phone through the hallways?
No.
Okay, so now I understand you just returned recently from, and correct the title of this, I'm just going to call it a National Safety and Security Convention type thing. What was it? What's it called?
It was the National School Safety Conference.
Okay. Where was that?
That was in Orlando.
Okay. What did you, what was that experience like? What did you learn?
It was interesting. There were over 900 people. They tell us that there were 49 states. The only one that wasn't there was Hawaii. We had folks from a lot of folks from law enforcement. It was about half. It was about half from law enforcement, half from schools, and most of them were K-12 schools, school districts, things like that. And there was a lot of good information related to, of course, unfortunately, that's what we talk about today, active shooters, but also other types of responses and the prevention piece too, what we can do to prevent these types of behaviors. And when we talk about behaviors, I don't want people to get this notion that our concern is only active shooters, or what we hear in the news is active shooters, because concerning behavior could be self-destructive behavior. It could be suicidal behavior, things like that.
And anything you took away from this conference that you plan on bringing back here to the school district and implementing?
Surprisingly, we learned from a lot of the speakers in the breakout sessions that we are actually doing a lot of what the standards are today. When we talk about single points of entry, when we talk about like video entrances, when we talk about threat assessments, threat assessment teams, things like that. So there was a lot that we found. Now, you're always going to get information from other districts, other folks about how something can be done. And there are a couple of things that I want to look at from a situation, for example, a reporting type of a source, a way that we can get students especially, but also parents in the community to report suspicious or concerning behavior to us, for example. The idea is today that there's an app for everything, and they're not always exactly maybe the best way of doing it, especially with kids, because again, we have to look at the technology that they're using, and a kid today would much rather text something than sit and type an anonymous report or something like that.
You mentioned single point of entry, and I know that's a big topic right now. Where do we stand? I know it's your goal, correct me if I'm wrong, but to have every school in our district have a single point of entry.
Yes.
And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but a single point of entry means that during the school day there's only one way in and one way out of the building, or one way in, right?
Yes. Right.
Normally the front door, the front entrance.
Yes.
Where do we stand right now on how many of our schools have that, and where do you see us getting kind of time frame wise?
There, and I don't know the percentage, but it's a very high percentage of our schools that have the single point of entry as far as driving fencing or driving people to come into a certain entrance, for example, because all of our schools are surrounded by fencing, for example. So part of the single point of entry is that everybody has to come in through, in this case, one particular point, a gate or something like that. And then once inside that area, the single point of entry gets defined a little further. And again, we talk about the target hardening of the school. So we don't want to have a bunch of doors open. The protocol is that the doors remain open until the last bell rings. Doors should be locked. Where we're at already, we're well underway of the video entrances or Some people like to describe them as a like kind of a buzzer that people come to the front door. There's a doorbell type of a situation. It has a camera. Somebody at the front desk can see who that is. They can ask for identification, and they can communicate with this individual, whoever it might be, maybe a parent or a visitor or a vendor, and then at that point they can decide to let them in.
Yeah, and you have to show ID to get in.
Yes.
Most of the time.
Yes.
I know they have that at South Fort Myers High School. We were just
Yes.
out there yesterday, and they were demonstrating their video entrance buzzer system. It seemed to work great. And so, how many of our would you like to see that at every one of our schools?
Oh, absolutely. That piece will be at all of our schools, because our schools range in age from built in the 40s till built a couple of months ago. There's a whole lot of infrastructure that we have to kind of work around. So it's not quite as easy as saying that we're going to do this. So some of them would be more costly than others to do. Some of our campuses are open where we have a number of buildings that are not necessarily connected other than maybe through a walkway or something like that. So that presents some challenges, but most of our schools are actually in the single point of entry as far as the gates and things like that. Most of those have that, and by this year we'll have the video entrances in all of the schools.
Yeah, that's awesome. So every single one of our schools will have that. What kind of time frame are we looking at? Are they all going to have it?
The video entrances will be done this year.
Awesome.
Yep.
In stages. I mean,
yes.
You can't do all of schools all at once,
right? Because we're doing it internally for the most part.
Cool. Now, at the school board meeting just a couple days ago, I think I heard that the district just hired 3 new zone security managers.
Yes.
What's their responsibility?
Well, our safety and security department is kind of unique in the sense that we have folks that do what we call fire and safety inspections at every building every year, and I have a couple of those folks, but I didn't have anyone that dealt with the security related concerns with each of the schools. For example, these individuals will interact more frequently with school resource officers at each of the schools. They're also part of our training team when we start training our threat assessment teams. Some of them will be involved in training with mental health awareness. They will be very instrumental in conducting the annual Florida Safe Schools assessments, risk assessments basically, and those we look at maybe not necessarily deficiencies, but where we're at in security related things, and it's not just alarms, cameras, things like that. It's going to look at fencing, construction. It looks at even the environment, how the campus is laid out, crime prevention through environmental design, for example. So those risk assessments look at a lot of things, and then they look at even, I mean, they're pretty extensive. They look at the numbers of times that law enforcement show up. We want law enforcement, fire service, EMS, all these folks to be part of this, and these zone managers will in fact coordinate that, work with these agencies to visit our schools and to offer their insight into the security aspects also.
And these zone managers, do they come from a police background, or how do you go about hiring these people?
They come from either a law enforcement or safety background, and and we want somebody that has some management skills. It's because they're not law enforcement, even though 2 of them are former law enforcement. They're managers in that sense that they're handling, dealing with school principals, SROs. They're kind of the liaison, if that's the right term.
And they each have their own zone.
Yes.
Their own set of schools that they oversee and assess, and then they report to you
Yes.
their findings
Yes.
and suggestions on how to make these schools safer.
Yes.
Cool. Now, is that different? I know you're forming, or you have already formed threat assessment teams.
We are forming those.
And is that different than the zone managers are part of those teams?
The zone managers will be part of it. We actually had our train the trainer Monday and Tuesday, and the new zone managers were part of that.
What is train the trainer?
We as a district trained 24 people, and 6 of them were law enforcement trainers from the agencies that represent our school resource officers, and the rest of them were safety and security folks, school psychologists, social workers, school counselors, and they went through a 2-day training, and this will allow them to go out and train our threat assessment teams. And each school has to have a team, and it would typically be comprised of a principal or an assistant principal, the school resource officer, school counselor, and it could be school psychologist, school social worker, the zone security manager, but a core group of, say, probably 4 or 5 individuals that would meet as a team when there's a concern over behavior, conduct, something like that, where there's a potential, of a threat. And this team would then, these folks would train those teams, and also assist them, in the makeup of the team, of the business that they need to conduct, because this is also new to Florida. This was just part of the statutory language that came out in March.
Okay. And you mentioned school resource officers, and we were, lucky that the Lee County Sheriff's Office, quick shout out, thank you, Lee County Sheriff's Office, for providing school resource officers for all of our schools last school year. And so where do we stand right now as far as this upcoming school year? Are all of our schools going to have a resource officer at every campus again this school year?
Yes. This year it'll be a little bit different. We have, instead of just the sheriff's office, and Sanibel had always provided a school resource officer for their school there, but this year we'll also have Cape Coral and Fort Myers City Police providing school resource officers for those city schools.
Cool. Big thank you to those departments as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, I know you're also big on mental health training, and I heard you talking about a program, Prepare program. Real quick, if we could quickly talk about, why you think mental health training is so important and kind of what it involves, and then maybe talk about this Prepare program.
Okay. Mental health awareness is important because, again, like I mentioned about reporting behavior, suspicious behaviors and things like that, and we've seen in a number of the violent incidents that have occurred, not all of them, but a number of them have been identified as potentially having mental health problems, or they could be developmental disorders, things like that. And I think we have to have folks understand, our staff, our safety and security, our teachers, to be aware of the potential problems that a student may be having. So, it's not common necessarily for a school teacher to have a background in mental health or counseling and things like that. So this will give them some training, some information in those areas, what to look for, what their concerns may be, and also to alleviate some concerns, because that we don't want to stereotype that to say that just because somebody has a mental illness that they're automatically dangerous, because that's not true. So that awareness piece goes both ways, identifying folks because of their behavior that they may be dangerous, and also because of their behavior that they may not likely be dangerous. This is just because of a mental illness or an emotional problem or a developmental disorder.
So who undergoes this mental health training?
Well, the mental health awareness, the idea is designed that we will train all of our staff, in particular, starting with school teachers, but we'll train all of our staff in mental health awareness. Ideally, I mean, I would like to get it down to every level of employee, whether that be custodial, maintenance, bus drivers, things like that, because they're going to see things too.
Mm-hmm. I think bus drivers is a big one.
Oh, it is. It's a huge one. Those folks deal with kids every day, twice a day, and
most often when they might be at their rowdiest, too.
Yes, exactly.
At the end of the day, school's over, winding down, coming home from school, and I know that
right.
I think a lot of people don't appreciate enough the kind of things that bus drivers have to deal with.
What they have to deal with, yeah. Absolutely, and they're dealing with maybe potential behavior problems while they're driving a bus.
Yeah.
So they are going to see things like bullying. They're going to see maybe different types of behaviors that a student may be exhibiting. You know, that even potentially what type of should they be bringing a weapon or things like that. And so they're kind of our first line of defense in these kind of matters, that are first eyes and ears dealing with students. So yes, we need to train those folks as well. So
the training, is that the PREPARE program?
PREPARE is, yes.
And I wrote it down. PREPARE is an acronym for Prevent, Reaffirm, Evaluate, Provide, and Respond and Examine.
Yes.
Tell me about this program.
Well, it's we've actually started the train the trainer piece of that, and it's being coordinated more with the psychology and social work services folks here, the counseling folks here at the school district, and because a lot of them have that background and are aware of this program. And PREPARE's been around. It was developed by the National Association of School Psychologists. So again, it's evidence-based, science-based program, and it's gonna do that piece of it. It's gonna and again, going back to the prevention, just like the threat assessment. The concept is to prevent problems, and as long as we can identify, we can intervene, we can teach people, that these aren't always dangerous behaviors or people, because of whatever problems they may be experiencing, but they may just need a little help.
Mm-hmm. I want to quickly circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the new legislation that went into effect in the state of Florida earlier this year. Can you maybe break that down quickly for maybe the people that are listening that aren't aware of that or don't know all the details about this new legislation and how it affects schools here in Florida?
There are several key pieces of that legislation. One being a major one being that schools must provide for what they call a safe school officer, and basically the legislation broke it down to mean that it be a school resource officer or two, a school resource officer or a guardian, and a guardian being an armed school personnel, that we would train and arm school personnel.
And the school district is implementing the school resource officers.
Yes.
And you prefer that option?
I do.
Why is that?
Well, I think, again, the Guardian program is training people with, basically, when you look at the curriculum and what they're expecting, they're training people in firearm safety, use of force when and things like that. But the school resource officers offer more to us in the sense that for those hours during the school year or school day, those officers, and it's not like a rotating service. It's not like every day we're going to get a different officer. It's not like these folks volunteer for these positions. They're assigned to a particular school, and for the most part, they spend a whole school year, and some of them have been at the same school for a number of years, and they get to know the kids. And again, that goes back to what I said earlier about the prevention piece is communication. They are going to be in a much better position to learn something, deal with behavior before it becomes problematic, And it doesn't necessarily have to be just at school. There are a number of cases where school resource officers, not necessarily here, but all over the country, that have intervened and discovered cases of human trafficking, of children that were being abused, neglected, that these kids aren't being taken care of, they're not being fed, the drug use and different things that are going on in the home. So they're typically going to be dealing with a lot of issues with kids that have nothing to do necessarily with the school district, but it impacts the kids and their ability to learn. And sometimes this is what we see from a violence perspective that brings these kids back here with some violent intent. It has maybe nothing to do with the school, but something that's happened in their life. The school resource officers add that component to it that I don't think a guardian is, because a guardian is typically an armed guard. That person would be a sentry. And the school resource officers are dealing with programming. They're working with the kids in different crime prevention related activities. They're assisting us in emergency drills and those types of situations.
Were there any other aspects of the new legislation that you wanted to mention?
We've talked about some of them. The mental health awareness is a big one, and the threat assessment. And I think those go hand in hand. I think those are crucial, because we mentioned about the hardware. We're always going to be catching up with individuals that want to do harm to us by the use of hardware technology, because we're always one step behind where they're at. Whatever method we've figured out to protect kids, somebody's figured out a way around it. Even if you look at it from a technology standpoint, from the different social media, the social media apps and things like that, it's astounding when you see the things that kids have been exposed to on social media, and especially the anonymous type of apps over the years that have led to harassment, bullying, threats, and as soon as somebody gets a handle on it, there's a new one out there that has figured out a way to get around it.
It's just such a different world that kids today are growing up in than even when I was growing up, not super long ago. But is this something that keeps you up at night, all these, or how would you kind of put into perspective this kind of new age of especially technology, social media, smartphone usage by young students, and how it affects their lives and your job?
It does, and exactly it does. You mentioned earlier about my background, and I've been around long enough to experience. I can say a time when we had a crime called harassment by communication, and it was somebody breathing heavy into a phone, calling somebody on a phone anonymously, and this was back before you had caller ID and things like that. Even that's gone by the wayside. Even though we have caller ID on cell phones, we know who's calling and things like that. But that technology has evolved, and it's changed. And the social media aspect today is the anonymity, the dangerousness of the anonymity, that the kids don't know who they're dealing with. So we've seen the sexual predators, and ironically, it's amazing we see these folks continue to do this. Knowing that somebody on the other line is likely an undercover police officer.
Yeah.
But that type of technology is what our kids are faced with today. And instead of maybe a kid growing up in the past or 20 years ago, where we used to say that the television was raising the kid, today it's technology. I mean, I see like elementary school kids with iPhones and smartphones and things like that. I can speak even personally, especially my oldest, but I have two grandsons that I see quite a bit. One's 3 and one's 6, and they both know how to use my phone. They both know the passwords. They can get into the iPad and things like that. So when I see it even at that young age, what are they going to do when they're in middle school, when they're in high school? And the things that are available to them. It was scary. I heard somebody say one time that there's more people have more technology in their phone today than maybe the first Gemini astronauts did in space.
Wow.
So we have more technology and the availability at our hands, but if it's not used for the right purposes, that can be dangerous.
And I think this is a good moment to bring back again and talk about staying aware of your surroundings and the human element of prevention, because this technology, these phones that everybody has, you look around anywhere you go, everybody's looking down at their phones, and that's part of what's preventing them from being aware of their surroundings, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's I think that's critical, the situational awareness. And you said about keeping me up at night, and I look at awareness and the situational awareness, and I try to step back from it to look at it, because after 40 years in law enforcement, you have a different take on looking people. I've referred to myself, I'm a professional people watcher, and I do. So I'm watching and I see things that maybe other people wouldn't, because they're just too involved. And I'm not suggesting that people become little me's, and I'm not paranoid, but you don't want to be looking over your shoulder all the time, but you have to be aware of what's going on around you. I used to use a video as a training aid, and a friend of mine worked in a department store in security, and he filmed. They captured a lot of shoplifters and just kind of weird things on camera, and he filmed. It gave me some clips, and one in particular that I used to use, and I used to use it a lot talking to especially women, especially young women, on awareness. And it was a guy that was, and again, this is, I say BC, before cell phones. This young lady was at a counter, jewelry, perfume, I'm not sure, and she's oblivious to what's going on around her. And this guy comes right up behind her, and he's holding something in his hand. He's holding it low, below, his waist. And he got up close to her, and he's holding it, and he back up. And then he got down like he was tying his shoe, and you could see he had something. And again, this is the camera dating, so it wasn't as clear as it would be today. But it turned out that this guy had a little mirror.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
And
before.
he was, today we call it upskirting with the phones, but he was using a mirror. Mm-hmm. And this went on for several minutes. And this young lady never turned around. Mm. She never turned like this to say, like, what are you doing? Yeah. And, we talk about, like, personal space and that arm length.
Were there other people around?
There were people that passed. There were people in this video that walked past, and
they obviously weren't
exactly
looking out for their fellow man either, or paying attention at least.
Exactly. Mm. Like, hey, this guy's trying to look up your skirt. No. And again, I just saw on the news today, there was a guy that I think somebody, some people did, in this case, they did in fact grab him. It was at a Target store, I think, and this guy's upskirting, and there was a young lady, 15-year-old girl or something, and he would back up enough, and somebody recognized it and saw it, and they did. They grabbed this guy and held him until the police got there, and this guy was arrested. Okay. And so there are some, but it's just not enough. We don't have people aware enough.
Switching gears, I wanted to mention, coming up in November, we have the big referendum on the ballot, the half-cent sales tax, and I know that if it passes, a lot of the money generated by this would go towards safety and security upgrades.
Yes. What
can you tell me about kinds of things that you would use the money for, and how they would benefit the school district and our students?
We mentioned the single point of entry, and that's still things that we could harden. We could target harden. I really think that we can always do a better job on access control, managing doors. I mean, the days of locks and keys are going away, and today it's the days of smart cards, or those types of devices that are keeping doors locked. And ideally, I'd like to see more of that, and that would be what a lot of this money would be used for example, the access control, especially the older schools with a lot of different doors and entries. Along with that, the camera capabilities. The cameras have come a long way, but they still only have certain ranges that we can cover a particular area. Our technology folks here are on top of things with they have a software platform that they can actually put a floor plan down into this software, and it can identify where the best location, for example, for camera coverage. So it can actually we can use this type of technology to place cameras instead of the old way of just walking around pointing to corners of the room and the floors to determine this. So that can do it. And then the bigger part of that is the video analytics that go along with that and that type of technology. I mean, I saw recently where a school's actually gonna incorporate facial recognition. I don't think we're there. I don't think that we need that type of technology. I don't know who we would put into that database, for example, that we would need that type of technology. But the video analytics would be important.
Like artificial intelligence,
yes.
kind of? Yeah. Yes. Where a security camera can almost make a decision based on what it's picking up that it's like this matches some patterns of something that could turn dangerous, and then it would alert
something unusual out of place. Yes. For example, and this technology has been around to some extent for a long time. The camera, especially a camera that actually, and it can be a fixed camera or a pan tilt zoom camera, but it would capture an image of a room, for example, and then all of a sudden somebody comes in, sets a briefcase down, walks away. Now all of a sudden that camera picks that up and says, "Oh, there's something here that wasn't here before," and so that analytic could alert someone that there's a problem. We're seeing that type of technology in airports and other secure locations already, and it's going to become affordable, more affordable for us in our realm here, and I think we're going to see that. That will be a big thing.
And am I wrong? Bonita Springs High School will have that?
Bonita Springs has some limited capability with that. Yes, that their camera technology can send alerts. The access control would allow us to send alerts. For example, with door hold opens or door alarms, and the cameras could pick that up as well. For example, if a door opens, a camera focuses on a particular door, so they're going to see who's coming in or who's going out. The unusual activity, that analytics can be built into it. If somebody's carrying something bulky, something like that. So that type of technology would be some of the things that we would use that money for. And just to reiterate, the access control is just so important.
I want to talk about at South Fort Myers High School, the demonstration you guys gave yesterday, you and the principal, Ed Matthews. You were showing us the red lock doors. Can you explain what those are, and is that something that you're trying to get at every school? I think right.
Yes.
Every classroom door.
Yes,
right?
every
you
classroom door.
So what exactly are these red lock doors?
I'm not exactly sure where that term came from. It's a classroom security function. I think at one time because they had a little red knob on it. It's a classroom security function lock, and this would allow a school teacher to lock their classroom from the inside. And the hazardous part was if there is some criminal activity, a shooter or something in a hallway, instead of going outside the door to be able to secure it, they can lock the door from the inside, and they can keep folks secure from the inside without going out into the hallway. Probably better than 2/3 of our schools classrooms already have that.
And eventually they all will.
Yes.
Cool. And now I know, so we've been talking a lot about all these new security measures, all this new technology that we want to implement and plan on implementing. But I know that you're also big on not turning schools into prisons or prison-like atmospheres.
Yes.
Because I know we have a lot of parents that would like to see metal detectors at every school before, every student has to go through one of those before they come into school. Is that, in your opinion, where you kind of get to the point where it's becoming more prison-like, or what's your philosophy on? I don't think anybody, or I don't want to speak for everybody, but we don't want to get to a point where schools are like prisons, right?
Right. And I'm not an educator, but I've worked around them for so many years and talking to them, and understand that to be a conducive learning environment, we can't turn our schools into prisons. If a kid has to come to school and go through scanners and metal detectors, it's not. Truthfully, in some of the research that I've seen, some of the studies that I've seen, it actually has the adverse effect that these kids feel that I'm really not in a secure place because I have to go through all these steps. I've seen also some case studies and some information where cases where, for example, where metal detectors were used, it did not prevent. I mean, if you look at a prison, there's folks that have weapons and drugs in prisons, and everybody that goes in there is searched, supposedly. So again, a metal detector, in that sense, is it going to stop? Yes, but then there's so many other ways you have to look at it. Is that building going to be secure 24/7 with a metal detector? Are we going to secure our outer perimeter? So as soon as we figured out a way of protecting using that type of technology, somebody's already figured out a way to get around it.
Yeah, and I don't want to focus too much on just the metal detector aspect of it, but kind of just more generally about why it's important for kids to feel safe at school, but as you mentioned, an environment conducive to learning as well.
Right. And again, I remember dealing with a situation where we had campus police, and we had some administrators and things felt, well, that we don't need this. That people don't want to see armed people on our campuses. Well, our kids, for the most part, have seen school resource officers for probably nearly 20 years, and maybe in some cases longer. It's not unusual. Yeah. They see these folks out on the street.
I personally loved seeing mine at school when I was in school.
Absolutely. Now, you could add other dimensions, as to is just the armed police officer, is that a threatening presence? I don't think so. But when we start adding those kinds of scanners and checkpoints, that hardening, fencing is not making it look like a prison, but fencing keeps out the people that want to be kept out, because if not, they could climb a fence. Yeah. But we don't want our schools turned into prisons. I just don't think that it's conducive to learning. I don't think kids would want to go there.
Is there anything else? We're getting near the end here. Is anything else exciting that you and your team are working on that maybe we haven't gotten to yet in this discussion that you wanted to mention?
Well, I think that some of the things that I spoke about, because they are so new, it's going to be a learning process. It's going to be an evolving process, and it's not all going to come right away. But I just want to stress more than anything that the best hope we have in protecting our kids today is not the technology. It's going to be the prevention. And if we look at it as like the 80-20 type rule, that 80% of what we do should be on the prevention aspect, and 20% should be on the response or the hardware kind of thing. I think parents like to hear, I spoke last night at a church, and parents like to hear that we're not all about like prosecuting kids and arresting kids, and they like to hear that that's what the SROs are all about too. And I think that's important, and I think that's where we're at. But it's still going to be a time of change for some folks, because some of the programs that we're implementing are all new. They're all new to schools, and they're all new to Florida.
Real quick, I know first day of school is right around the corner. August 10th. What's your plan for the first day of school? Are you going to be out visiting schools? What are you going to be doing?
I will, and fortunately now I have the 3 zone managers. The 3 zone managers, are our coordinator, and even our 2 fire inspectors. They will be out. We'll have them in each of the zones. Should there be problems, and the district does a good job with it because they have folks that are related to maintenance, to transportation, and being the district's in 3 zones, it makes it a little more manageable. But yes, we will be out with all of those folks as well.
And real quick before I let you go, a little bit more about yourself. I know, so you come from a law enforcement family, right? But you also have some educators in your family as well.
I do.
So you've got you're best of both worlds, law enforcement, and now you're in the school. Well, you were with Florida Southwestern as well, but you have 3 children.
Yes.
Right. You have 2 sons. They live here in Southwest Florida.
Yes.
One is a professor, you said.
He is a professor as of this week.
Awesome.
Working for FGCU.
What does he teach?
He teaches educational leadership, and he's worked for he actually started as a school teacher here in
the Lee County School District. Which school?
He taught music at trying to think of the elementary school that he
putting you on the spot here.
Taught at. Yes.
There's a lot of schools here.
And he worked here in the district office for a time when he was finishing his master's degree.
You mind if I ask his name?
His name's Chris Parfitt.
Cool. Maybe some people out there may have had him as a teacher or something.
Yep.
And your other son is a chef?
My other son is a professional chef. He's a trained, educated chef. He went to school for culinary arts and things like that. And he works at a newer community in Naples. Greyhawk was the name of the place, but it's a brand new.
It's a restaurant?
No, it's a community, a country club community. And my daughter lives in Southern California, and she works for the University of California education system.
Nice. What does she do?
She works. She has an MBA. She works in the School of Business for University of California, Riverside.
Very cool. And married?
Married for trying to think. How many years now?
Oh, okay, you got it.
Better than 35 years. My son's 35, so way oldest. So better than 35 years I've been married. And my wife's originally from Pennsylvania as well.
Cool. All right. Well, we're very happy to have you here at the School District of Lee County. And thank you again for agreeing to be our first guest for this new podcast that we're trying out here. And I think it was a good discussion. Very interesting topics, wide range of things we talked about.
Yes.
And yeah, thank you again. And for everybody out there who took the time to listen, thank you very much. And we'll keep you updated on our next episode.
Thank you.